Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on Positive Philter. I'm joined by Angie Witkowski. And guess what? I think I'm going to give myself credit because this is the first time we met and I got her name correct the first time. As you know, on my other episodes, I'll be butchering names, but I practice. I'm getting better, y'all. And so I've been connected to a lot of my guests through, I believe, test PR. And so I get to meet a lot of guests for the first time. And usually it turns into relationships. I learn a little bit about their journey and they're doing amazing things. So shout out. Shout out to the people that connect me with guests. I love this form. Podcast really connects me with so many amazing people that I maybe never would have met, but because of the podcast, we're connected. But I want to get into it. So Angie's an author. She has a book that I think would be very beneficial for the listeners to hear. But before I want to get to know her too. So Angie, can you just give a little brief overview of who you are?
Oh, yeah, that's a great way to start off a podcast. And what a deep question. I can certainly tell you where I grew up and what I do. But me as a person who I am, I love your podcast because it's positive. And I think if you were to describe me, I am incredibly optimistic in life. And optimism, I think, is something that is hard earned. You got to fight for it. And so that's what I hope to cast. But a little bit about my biography. I grew up in northern Michigan, and all I wanted to do was get out of the small town, not because it was a bad town. I just read a lot as a kid and knew that there was wide world and adventure awaited. So I went to the University of Michigan, and apparently that wasn't far enough. I joined the Marine Corps after college and spent 4 years on active duty, moved to Marine Corps Base Hawaii for most of my time. Thank you, taxpayers, for funding my early 20s being single adventure in Hawaii. And after that, I started working in the pharmaceutical area, but realized during that time, since it's early 2000, that something was unique about my perspective, courtesy of the Marine Corps. It was the leadership development experience I acquired. How we talked about leadership in the Marine Corps was that everybody aspired to lead, even if you didn't have direct reports. And in the private sector, leadership was really only for people who had a job title, like a manager. And those two words, leader and manager, were used synonymously as if they meant the same thing. That sparked an idea. I worked with a woman who I had served with in the Marine Corps. We wrote our first book, Leading from the Front, to help others reimagine what this word leadership means. It's not about a job title. It's about your behavior. We started a consulting firm. We wrote another book in around 2016 called Spark. And in the space that I'm doing right now, I work with clients, I keynote, I coach, helping people build their leadership skills. But the most recent project that I'm on is helping people take risks in their life, hence the book Bet on You. That was a mouthful.
No, that's excellent, man. My mind was going all kinds of places, and I love this. And so, I'm a military brat. My dad served 30 years in the Army. And I'll be honest, even as a kid, I did not see very many women in the Army. And women, my dad retired colonel. I think I didn't even see a lot of women at his peer level. I didn't see a lot of women colonels growing up. And so talk about that military experience. I'm assuming Army is it transferable? Were there a lot of women officers in the Marines, or in your experience in the Marines?
Not at all, actually. My dad had been a Marine, and when he suggested the idea of ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps program in college, he's like, hey, I served in the Marines. I don't even know if they let women in. And the dynamics are interesting for a woman in the Marine Corps, at least back in the day. I don't know the numbers now. Out of 175,000 Marines in the Corps, only 1,000 were women officers, which are women managers. So very few, not a traditional career choice, which is funny because when I wrote my first book, Leading from the Front, it was really directed to women because not a lot of women turn to the military for leadership best practices, but there's a wealth of them there. But when I started just, working with women leaders and businesses, men would come up and say, "Wait a second, I don't know this stuff either. Can you come, broaden the scope?" And I imagine, Phil, you growing up too in a military family, the leadership traits and principles that your family gathered around definitely influenced you. Maybe you thought everybody knew about those.
No, I mean, that's crazy. I think some of the things, obviously I chose a different path. I rebelled. I
Yeah.
was like, my dad, if you listen to some of my episodes, my dad was he military through and through. That was his life. And I guess I was like, that's not my path.
Mhm.
But I did realize the things that were organic was integrity and, discipline and I don't know, just think, my making my bed every day. Like these are things that I took from my dad. And then I guess you're right. Like I thought that was just how it is. But one of the things I also sparked in this, particularly as women officers, shout out to one of my favorite cousins, Lisa Nagorny, was that it translated to the real world. She was a veteran as well, and her leadership experience going to ROTC, becoming a naval officer, and then serving in Afghanistan.
Wow.
When she went to the private sector, she was doing it. She went to Wharton, like she was boom, boom, boom. So can you talk about your experience as a woman post military? And it's like you was already ahead of the game, joining the private
Yeah.
sector.
So I was and I wasn't. I'll be really honest with
Mhm.
you. I had this really lovely English degree. So I had a really foundational literature, science, and arts education. I had the Marine Corps experience where I learned how to lead and I was a public affairs officer. So I knew a lot about media and community relations. Then I started working in business. I did not know business. I didn't really understand marketing. I didn't really understand this whole profit and loss thing, which is actually really important to understand. In the military, you don't have a human resources department. And so what does HR do? And now that's all I do is primarily work with HR. So it was actually, I would say, a confusing time because I didn't really know the value of me. I didn't really realize the unique skills that I had possessed. And I realized too, I had a lot to learn. And I think in the military, they tell you all the time, and I think it's to help justify all the sacrifice you're making and all the sleep you're not getting and the heart of the job and the kind of disproportionate compensation. They kind of tell you that, these civilians, you're tougher than civilians. But then I started working in the private sector. I'm like, wait a second. These people work harder than what I was told. So it was really a big wake up. And then it took about a couple of years to figure out this leadership thing. Like, oh, that's the lens I see the world in that is unique to my experience and me.
Well, I mean, I ain't gonna lie though. I mean, did you think the private sector was a little soft? They call y'all devil dogs and yelling at nobody, and then like you go to the private people's whining and complaining, and you're like, I didn't sleep. Like you get what I'm saying? Like, did you think like that translated like they don't know how easy they have it, or vice versa, when you're thrown into a different realm? And that's just my thought. My dad used to be like that too. My dad's like, don't complain. You know what I've been through and all that kind of thing.
My pharmaceutical training experience was unique. And so I will say I worked in a sales organization. So people were very driven, very results focused because their compensation relied on it. So that was very competitive in that regard. But I remember that we went to our pharmaceutical sales training and it was held at this really fancy golf club where we had to stay for a couple of weeks. And my friends were my new colleagues, I should say, they were looking at the facilities going, oh my gosh, do we have to eat the same breakfast again? Are they really going to make us share rooms? And I'm like, oh my gosh, hot food, our own shower. I only have to share this with one person? Sweet. So I think it's that. I think that, there's some comfort certainly in the private sector that you don't get in the military.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good segue because, I mean, your book is about risk, right? And I love it. I would like to say that, as I grew up, maybe this is a byproduct of my ADHD and, my identity is that like, it's a risk averse. No, it's not I'm not scared. Like,
you're not scared.
No.
Pro risk. You bet on yourself.
Pro risk. And I used to always say, it's like, my dad, this is how I keep on going back to, it's like, you all right, you're not bleeding. And so I would think like a lot of things are not as scary because it's not like life or death, right? And so that has shaped my mind to risk. Like the worst that's not going to happen, I'm not going to get really hurt. And so we had to reframe that for some people. Like they always, the natural byproduct risk is the natural instinct of human beings to look at your environment and make sure that you're safe. But like most times we're not at risk of anything really harmful but our ego. So as you develop this risk mindset, like I want to first of all, what do you think about risk? Like what is your basic philosophy around risk? And we'll go deeper into like how serious risk is.
Yeah. So we're all in a relationship with risk and the concept of risk. And the question is it the one that you want? We are born, as you were talking about, Phil, really pro risk. Think about yourself learning how to crawl. You'd crawl, you'd pull yourself up on the table, then you try to take your first steps walking, like you were pushing it a little bit further. Then you'd bash your head on the table as you fell, you get on the floor and cry, then you pulled yourself back up again. I mean, that's again, talk about courage and facing your fears and conquering it. But something happens in life. What happens in life? Our relationship with risk, not for everybody, but some of us change. The important thing I like to share with people is that risk is a learned behavior. And the primary influence over how we feel about risk and our risk tolerance, so to speak, is our maternal figure in our life or our mom. So think about what your mom was afraid of. My mom was afraid of snakes. I'm deathly afraid of snakes. And for those of you listening, it's okay to be afraid of snakes. Like I think that's a healthy fear to have. Respect snakes. But my mom also really never put limits on my dreams. And my guess, Phil, is with your parents too. Like they really pushed you and encouraged you. And I noticed this about, I'm a mom. I've got 2 kids. Some parents are like, no, 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 don't go there, don't do this. And I'm like, yeah, just be safe. I think I'm trying to raise my kids. The research helps support, I think, me as a parent growing, raising my kids. But so again, what we think about risk today was heavily influenced by people in our lives. And knowing that should be somewhat liberating because we can change. And I think there's a lot of people in this world too. They'll say to you, I'm risk averse, but it's not in every area of your life. I've got some really great friends who are Navy SEALs. They would risk their life for their friends, for their country, for the mission, for whatever. But they would hesitate to invest in their own education, risking their finances that way. I have some people who are crazy with, their career choices, but God forbid, investing in a short-term rental and putting some money aside there. So it's really just understanding the areas where you're more risk prone and where you're a little bit hesitant and understanding the story that's behind it too.
I love it. I was thinking about that now, multiple risk parts, like financially, like, I'm not going to invest $100. I'm scared to lose money, but ask me to do a speech in front of people. I don't have a risk. I don't feel like there's a risk in public speaking. So I like that idea that it's different pockets, right? One thing that you said was that it was passed down. I'm thinking about that generational thing. Are you meaning like the moms or more so like your primary caregiver? Is that because like, I don't know, like both my parents had different risk things, right? So like I'm looking at both my parents as nurturers in different ways. And then one is like not afraid of public speaking. That's from that person. And then one is, like you said, afraid of snakes. And that's that one. So I got some learned behaviors or risks separately from both parents. And now I'm looking at myself as a father. Me and my wife are different risk people. So is that what you meant? Like,
yeah, it's definitely I will say both of your caregivers and the people who influence you in your perceptions, but with an emphasis particularly on your mom.
Okay.
And that's not to mom shame or blame. It's really to hopefully be enlightened, like, oh, this is where this comes from and I can change. And, in the book, Bet on You, we write about 3 common misconceptions about risk, because I think that there's a lot of weight that is put on the word. So just defining risk, all risk really is a decision that leads you into uncertainty. That's it. And if you put it that way, it's something we do all the time. But there's also 3 common misconceptions about risk. The first one is that it's the opposite of reward. And it's how it's presented to us, risk versus reward, when really risk is the path to reward, because anything good in our life like getting married or
Hmm.
having kids required risk. Like those are crazy risks. Marriage success is only 50-50. And if you were to tell me I'm going to jump on a plane and it's got a 50-50 chance of landing, I would say, don't take that flight. Like that's crazy. Let's not do
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
Second misconception is that risk is a leap. Like it's a big step, like it's a big gamble. But risk done right is really a series of steps
Little
to
ones. Yeah.
succeed. It's not quit your job, change your life. That's probably a really bad decision. That's, fast and thoughtless. We want people to succeed taking risk. It's thoughtful. So baby step, one at a time. The final is we think that risk, we can avoid it, and we can't. It's just around us. And if
Hmm.
you're living with something, shouldn't you figure out how to use this quality to work for your advantage rather than be at the mercy of risk? Really lean into it and get into the discomfort of this uncertainty space.
I love it. I mean, this is awesome because I'm learning and I'm telling and have so many questions. But one that came to my mind is how much is risk intertwined with identity and, basically culture. So let's say, for instance, I'm a black male. You see it,
Mhm.
right? There's certain things that maybe as me as a black male would not risk or have the same level of risk because of my identity, maybe where I would go, who I would talk to, the roles. You as a woman, you have an identity, and maybe other women are less likely to take the risk of going into the military because of the culture around the military. So, what about the component of identities and the certain risks that we take?
Oh gosh, if we can talk about this, I think it's probably one of the most powerful conversations to have. I mean, there are risks that I won't take that maybe Phil you would take. Like if it's dark in a Walmart parking lot, I'm going to be
Hmm.
really afraid to walk to the car by myself. I probably won't do it. I probably ask somebody to do it, whereas you might feel very comfortable doing that. Or same with walking on a path where there's, wooded area to the side of me. I would just wouldn't do that. It's a physical risk that I wouldn't take. I'm
Hmm.
thinking about in a meeting environment being a woman as a minority. I may not be as assertive because I don't want to
Hmm.
be called the B word, because that might be
Hmm.
like, or I'm conscious of my face, right? Because I don't want the RBF thing going on. So I think that
Hmm.
there's all these different um, considerations that we're taught in life
Hmm.
on what to do, what not to do, how to behave, how to say. So I think it's significant. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what does that
Well, I
spark for
mean,
you?
what I think about what it sparks in me is in how much when we're doing this analysis of risk, right? Is how much is it rational? How much of it is like this is not my fault? Like this barrier of like you being called the B word and not taking that risk. No, that's not fair to you. Take that chance anyway. Other people wouldn't have to have this risk analysis about it, right? Like that's society's issue, not mine to examine the risk. So I'm thinking about sometimes like challenging that risk and more so thinking like, I understand as a black male, I'm the only one in this room, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I don't know, maybe that's just because I'm impulsive. So I think or rebellious, right? Like I like it maybe it's thrilling. I like risk, so I'm going to talk and get that. I like that feeling in my stomach. So I don't know. My thought was just like while I examine the risk, sometimes I go down a layer and say how much of this is like right, this is a universal risk, or this is like one is because of the world and environment around me, and in actuality, it's not fair. So I'm going to challenge it by taking that risk.
And that's a calculation we all have to make.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important for us all to know that our mind constantly looks at the horizon, assessing for danger.
Hmm.
And we have an amazing ability to catastrophize what the
Hmm.
worst case scenario can look like. And we spend a lot of time in that space, sometimes not even thinking about best case. I'm thinking as we're talking about this too, there pay discrepancy or going in and asking for a raise or advocating for yourself or ringing your own bell. Like worst case scenario in our mind, which might prevent us from doing it, is that we lose our job, we're homeless. All these negative things happen when in reality, maybe it's the organization needs us to do that because that's how stuff happens around here. So I always like to think again, when we write a lot about this and Bet on You, what are your holdbacks and are they real? And where can you
Hmm.
nudge it a little bit further? So I would say getting some opportunity to reflect with your relationship with risk, understanding where you're more pro risk or less, a little bit more risk averse, and just writing it down. Like just
Mhm.
really understand what's holding you back in these areas. And is it true? Is this something that you've concocted in your mind? Is this the story that you told yourself? Is this an old tape? Or is it not true? And maybe there's some more room to negotiate in this space.
I love it. And one of the things I thought about too is that like courage in numbers, and like
Mhm.
more likely you are you're gonna take a risk more if you have someone with you. So like, hell no, I'm not gonna jump on a plane and jump off the plane and skydive, but like we going to a party or something, a bachelor party, and everyone's like, we already paid. You want to be the last one out. So you jump on that plane, you do something that you normally would not risk by yourself. So can you talk about the importance of community and others in regards to facing risk? Because obviously sometimes we don't do it by ourselves, and we are more prone to do riskful things or risky things with others and not alone.
Yeah, and I think that word too, that word circling around is contagion. We don't really write about that a lot in the book. We do talk about the importance of people when you're
Mm-hmm.
stepping out for the very first time. And we only have so many first person experiences in life. And if we want to do something a little bit more daring in our lives, maybe we want to either go to a conference or start a small business or start a side hustle, things like that. It's going and asking people about their experiences. So, acquiring secondhand experiences to help us form our thoughts and opinions. I think oftentimes we celebrate in our society these lone warriors out there doing things, captains of their ship on their own, when there are people out there who are doing things that we want to be doing and probably succeeding, would love to share their best practices. So, to go back to your question, yeah, that sometimes people can be our greatest advocates and inspirations to help us do the things that we want to do that are in our hearts and on our minds. And those are the types of risks that I hope that people think about taking. So maybe not what everybody else is doing, because that could get you in trouble sometimes.
Yeah,
What
but
are you
there's
doing
but
class
there's
at lunch today? Let's go do this. But I'm talking about, well, what are the things that you want to do, and what are the risks required to go do those?
I mean, I get it. I believe in positive peer pressure. Like I joined
Yeah,
Toastmasters, right? I'm a member of Toastmasters, and we positively peer pressure people to talk.
right.
You come to our meeting, and we say, "Hey, you're going to talk in this meeting too," and we're gonna. That's a risk for them to do public
Oh, yeah.
speaking. So that is a positive peer pressure. I think you spoke about it briefly just now. Is that talking to other people that led the way, and that's really going to tail into mentorship. Like thinking about like I think about all the times I've took quote unquote risk because one, I saw someone do it before me, but I reached out to that someone and I was like, yo, can you guide me? You did it. Like, if you can do it, I can do it. Would you mind being my mentor? So, how important is mentorship in regards to risk taking?
Phil, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I would think it's absolutely key. And I think the thing about finding a mentor is can be really tough for people, because it seems like a significant proposal for someone. Like if I were to come to you and I don't really know you, Phil, and say, hey, would you mentor me? You might be like, oh, well, that seems like a big ask. But if I were to go to you and say, hey, Phil, could you just spend 20 minutes and help me understand how you got your podcast started? You'd be like, oh, okay, that's
Mhm.
a doable ask. So I like to think about starting to find champions, people who are doing things that you're doing that you admire, and you'd love to learn a little bit more about that. And then if the relationship develops, it'll evolve into a mentorship. Like I think about my mentors, and you're probably the same way too. Like I wouldn't call them mentors. It didn't start off as a mentoring relationship. It just feels like a marriage proposal. Like somebody asked me that the other day, do you want to mentor me? And I'm like, I will have coffee with you. Well, let's see where it goes from there.
Yeah, big commitment. No, I mean, I was being honest. I talk about this as two ways, right? Sometimes you do get this like mentorship match if it's a program,
Yeah.
and then you committed and you did it. It's like a dating service, right?
Mhm.
In that dating service, you want a partner and they match you, right? It takes that awkwardness to ask. But I love what you said too. Sometimes, like if you're not going to a dating service, you also find partners just organically. Like you see what a relationship builds. So I've been a part of both, like formalized ones and informal ones that I feel like really match that analogy that you have. And like I think sometimes I've been down the line where I'm like, man, we talk a lot. Like, can I call you my mentor now? And they're like, okay, like I guess I didn't even know. I was
Yeah.
just helping you out. And I've done that before too. Like 6 months in, I gave them that label as mentor, and they're but we never thought it, we never really like talked about it. I was like, or someone's done that to me. They're like, shout out to my mentor, Philip. I was like, what? Like, I didn't know. Like, I was just helping you out. I didn't think you looked at me that way. You know what I'm saying? So I love that mindset. So as you develop this, as you talked about risk, what were some self-discoveries that you learned during the path? Like, wow, like I wish I would have known this, you know, years earlier. This has really helped me as I research this. This is filling me up.
The biggest thing I gained from writing Bet on You was when I wrote Bet on You, and that was during the pandemic. I co-created Lead Star. We were a leadership training and development firm. You know, when 2020 hit, we had our whole year lined up of air travel programs, live events, tremendous amount of business. It was looking like a bright, shiny year from a business success story. And then everything went away. Everything. And that was gut wrenching. And the way that we scrambled to get our business back together was to transition. We'd already been, but like transitioning more into coaching, which we could do virtually, and writing a book. And so getting a book together to sell to a publisher and getting that forward. So when you co-author a book, the person who typically is the one that puts it all together is the English major. Shout out for English majors there. And I spent a lot of time like alone in my bedroom with my computer on my lap or my laptop there, just typing and learning. And it was really therapeutic for me to be able to put thoughts down on the importance of reflection. You know, we organized the book into a unique, I like to think about it as a unique conversation. We started talking about, okay, what are we talking about risk? And then the next piece is, well, where should we take risks? And really connected to your dreams. Most people don't dream enough. Most people find themselves living somebody else's version of their life versus their own self-authored version. So helping people really recognize how to start dreaming again about this big ways. And that was really useful for me. Then we go into the process too on how to create wins in your life, not like mountaintop moments, but just like small things so you can build your confidence and you can build, you know, the motivation you need to spark change in your life, and then how to deal with with fear and failure. And I think also too, just being able to reflect on what am I afraid of right now?
Well, I
And is
love
it
it.
real? Is it real?
Let's dive into that more deeply about the failure part, right?
Mhm.
One of the things I've learned over time is that, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, is as I address failure or look it straight in the face, most times failures are not really that much. They're failures. Like, so I'll share activity I've done like a while ago, I didn't get an opportunity that I was really excited about.
Mhm.
And I like really was upset, like crying upset. So I don't know, randomly in my mind, I was like, all right, I'm gonna show them. And I wrote it down. Like I wrote the failure down and I dated it. And then I was like, you know what? Let me go back and look at the other times in my life of times I really wanted something and didn't get it and date it too. So I wrote a whole list. I called it a failure log and I dated it. And then looking at that list, I saw that over time, the things that I thought were failures weren't really that bad. In the years later hindsight, in that moment, it was devastating. So I'll give you an example. I didn't get into JMU right after I graduated, right? I got waitlisted. My grades was trash. And I put, didn't get into JMU first time, 2003. But then I said, looked at that thing. And I said, well, I went to Bowie State. I met great friends. I had the HBCU experience. I made Dean's List. And then I got into JMU, right? So in that moment in 2003, that was a failure. But now, looking in hindsight, I got experience. I met new people. I, did great. I actually still went to JMU. So in hindsight, that wasn't really a failure. And I did that, and I was able to do that with a lot of things on that list. Maybe some things in there, whatever. But some things made me a better person. So I reevaluated. So can you talk about the awareness of failure, how that's integral into risk in your book?
Oh, and I really love the idea of a failure log, Phil. And I think I might go out and back and in fact do it. I think it is so key how we perceive failure and what is real failure. I mean, have a fail. Maybe you didn't get a promotion. Maybe you were looked over. Maybe you didn't get the college that you want or the opportunity you're seeking. And you wake up the next day committed to do something different, do something more, do something better. I call that a success story. You woke up the next day with that internal motivation and drive to learn from the experience. That to me is success. When I deliver leadership workshops, I always ask the people in the audience, have you learned more from failure or success? Hands down, everybody's hands goes up for failure. And I'm like, the goal isn't to try to fail. The goal is to keep pushing yourself. And when you get rejection, that just means not now. It doesn't mean never. That no isn't fatal. It's not final. It's okay. What are you going to do? It's like I have written book proposals that my agent didn't want to represent. I've put those proposals to publishers that they didn't want to represent. And it just goes on and on. Like if I could write my failure log list, which I will do because that's kind of interesting. I've even been through a divorce, and some people call that a failed marriage. I don't think it's a failed marriage. I had two beautiful, amazing children and was married this person for nearly 20 years. It was the end of that relationship. It wasn't a failure. It may not be how I wanted it to end, but I've got some really great outcomes. I'm remarried. It's like, that whole divorce thing was like the best, worst thing that could have happened to me. So I think sometimes we just think about failure as an event versus just like a milestone, and the story keeps going.
Yeah, the only part that I find difficult for that, and for me, and this is my failure log, is like, but when am I supposed to actually feel good about this? You know what I'm saying? So for instance, right, like I wrote it out like maybe in 2003, even when I got in the gym, probably still had a chip on my shoulder. It wasn't until I'm like a 38-year-old man that it finally felt good. So like, I don't know what the turnaround is for feeling good about failures, right? It's not going to be instant. You feel me? Like you said with the marriage part, like I know all my friends that have experienced divorce. It's very devastating for like a couple years.
Oh yeah.
And then you're like, all right, I don't want to fail. I mean, I understand failure is part of it, but when can I get over this? What I'm saying? Like, when does it not hurt as much? So I don't know.
I don't know about that. I don't know in that answer too, because I think we're obviously human emotional beings. I do think it comes down to what story are you going to choose to tell yourself? Is it going to be a failure story, or is it going to be a success story? I was talking to a friend recently, and he is a Marine Corps veteran. He was in the midst of an ambush. He survived. One of his really good friends got shot. They fortunately did survive too, but it was just a terrible situation. And a little bit later, his friends were like, hey, what happened? And there were a lot of things bad that happened. But he said to his friend, hey, listen, there's two stories we could tell here. We could talk about the misfortune, the poor planning, the errors, the mistakes, and we can repeat these thoughts the rest of our life. Or we could say, dang, I'm glad you were next to me. I'm glad that we got the resources. I'm glad we were able to both be here today to talk about this, because that's a story I'm going to tell myself. And so I think that helps, right? As we think about grief or loss, because we can say like, get over it. You didn't get the promotion. You just lost your job. But man, that freaking hurts.
Yeah.
Like that's hard stuff. So it's not get over it. It's learn how to live with it and experience it and move through it. And you could certainly go back in time and ruminate over it, but that's not going to help you move forward.
Yeah. I was about to say, like, you don't want to be, toxic positive and like that. But at the same time, you also want to be resilient. And so it's a balance, right? Like, you don't tell someone, oh, just get over it, or, oh, that's okay. Years later, you'll get over this, right? And that's not going to help me. But at the same time, you're going to say, it's weird because you can say, but years later, you're going to get over it, right? So it's like the tone, like it's a, get what I'm saying? Like, you will get over it years later, but that's not what I want to hear now. So I don't know. And I think that goes into my mindset with risk, though, because I still do need to have resilience, because like eventually I do need to get over it, because I need to take that risk again. You get what I'm saying? Like, I need to go to a promotion again, or I need to be open to love and get remarried again if I want to, right? Like, so it's a balance of taking that risk again. You need to allow yourself time to heal from that risk, but then we also need to get over that risk. How do you think about that statement?
Yeah, I think whenever people are pursuing their goals and taking risks, man, don't we wish that point A to point B was smooth, straight, upward trajectory, but that's nobody's path to success. There's so many things that we can plan for, but there's so many unplanned events that happen that we just can't even perceive or marvel at. And you just have to recognize that, like that's life. It happens to us. And how are you going to respond? I had a dear friend of mine last night call, and it was courageous of her to tell me that the organization restructured and she lost her job 2 weeks ago. Like, talk about a courageous conversation, admitting something like that happened to you. And she's like, in the 2 weeks that have followed, she's like, this is what I've done. This is what I've done. This is what I've done. And I'm like, okay, here's what I know. Like, it wasn't a toxic positivity moment. Like, you're going to be great. We know that, at the end of a rain, there's a rainbow. Like, that's bull crap. What she needed to know was like, we're here for you. And this is part of your story. And this freaking sucks.
Mm-hmm.
But let's figure out what we can do to move through it.
So like empathy, listening, active listening, validation, mixed with also we're going to do something about it and move forward too. So it's both.
Yep. And we can lick our wounds, but then we got to get up and start taking action.
Yeah. I love that. So what has been some like, the haters, what has been some critiques of your risk, philosophy? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. She a Marine. Yeah, right. She a leader. She don't know, she, of course she's tough, I don't know. What's some things that you've heard from haters?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look back at the 20 years, all the things that I've heard from haters. Oh, the funniest one recently was I was looking at a YouTube video that was on Inc. in some Inc. magazine. And they're like, what does she know? She's a woman who served in the Marine Corps. I'm like, well, thank you.
I'm about to say the opposite. Like, yeah, what she do know? Like, she's in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. So and it was just like, that's kind of stuff I try not to pay so much attention to. I mean, one of the very first things I realized when writing my first book, Leading from the Front, was that you're going to expose pieces of your life that people just aren't going to either care about, they're going to disagree with, they're going to think are stupid. I mean, I've been training and developing for 20 years and I do evaluations and I get open, candid feedback. And there really isn't something that hurts my feelings. And I think it's just building up the nerve through the process. Now, if, the important people in my life give me constructive feedback, I pay attention to it. In the research around confidence, and this is something really important to risk taking, is that if you let anyone and everyone influence your important opinion of yourself, you're going to be on a confidence roller coaster. We need people, though, to be able to speak truth with. But if I let people in to give me feedback, it's because I love them, I trust them, and I think they've got my best interest at heart. So when I see like negative hater feedback, I'm like, you don't know me. All you know is what I'm choosing to share with you.
I love it. Well, I was also about to say the volume, man. I think we're tougher. We're a different generation. Like, I read comments on social media. I'm like, they're trolls. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm also didn't grow in social media, but the kids, the volume at which they get feedback is totally different. So I don't 100%. Know. I don't know where I was going with that. I was just saying it's probably easier for our generation to be like, oh, they're haters online. You know what I'm saying? I think what would be for me, like you said, the same thing. Like, if I get a random comment on Facebook or whatever, I'm like, all right, whatever. But if my wife says she's disappointed in me, I'm like, oh, I love my wife. The person I look up to, she mad, you know what I'm saying? So, I'm able to
100% with you on that. And I think that's the really key piece. And that's part of it, right? When you're taking risks in your life, when you're making decisions to step out of your comfort zone, you want everybody to support you. You need, in many ways, that positive reinforcement. There's a lot of research that shows when we're ambitious and we're seeking excellence, that positive reinforcement encourage us to go continue seek excellence. So when we don't get it, it can be debilitating. It can make us shirk our confidence. But the key piece is filter. I love that, positive filter.
Oh, there.
That's your filter. Yeah.
Bars. All right. So, I don't know. I think this is great. I think I'm gonna go to my next segment. I mean, because I think that was a great way to end it on bars. So I lied. I told you earlier on this show that it was shout outs and plugs, but I actually do have another segment. I think you actually listened to an episode, so I think you might know what's coming up. It's called Shot for Shot. A shot for shot. I get to ask you any random question. You ask me any random question. You will go first, so I go first.
You go first.
So I listened very well. I was listening. You said you did an interview for Inc. magazine, or you was on the video.
It's a video.
So I'm assuming, are you tatted?
No.
Oh, dang, that was my question. I was about
Oh,
to say,
INC. Yeah, incorporated, not ink.
ah,
Different kind of ink.
that was
Different
my question.
generation.
I was going to say, okay, so I got to change my question then because I was about to say, what is your favorite tattoo? Because I thought you said inked. Oh, man. Okay. Dang, you got me off. Okay. Who was someone that even with you, you felt it was not like risky in a bad way, but risky to talk to, as in you were nervous? Like, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to talk to this person that I look up to. Can you tell us a time you did that, kind of a social risk that you
Oh,
took?
yeah, I'll tell you exactly, and it was quite some time ago. I was at a conference in Florida, and it was I think it was Forbes conference, and it was early in the day when Leading from the Front just came up, and Gloria Steinem was there. And my risk was going up to her and introducing myself and having a brief conversation. And it was really risky. I get really nervous around people who I put on pedestals, and she's definitely one of those. So that was, and then I remember asking her, what would you say to yourself, who's my age, 30? And she said back, she's like, I would tell myself that even though my choices aren't what everybody else is doing, they're great, and keep making them.
I love it. I got one tail question then. So let's go back. How did you analyze that you were going to take that risk? You was like, I'm not going to have this moment again.
Well, I knew I wasn't going to have the moment again.
I don't know. What did you say? What did you do? Did you, and then I like this story too. Like, you humanized it. Like, did you shake her hand and real confident? Like, take us through that real quickly. I love this story.
I think so. I try to hide my nerves, especially in the Marine Corps, we had this thing called command presence. Like, you try to, showcase that you are, completely in charge and in control of yourself, even though you might be a little bit nervous on the inside. And I just saw her. She was standing sort of by herself. And I'm like, if not now, never. If not now, never. And you don't want to be 60 years old thinking, damn, I had that chance to talk to Gloria Steinem.
Excellent. I love that story. And I'm going to use that command presence. All right. What's your question for me?
What's your favorite ice cream?
Dang, someone asked me this the other day.
Really?
Yeah. Well, on a podcast too, and it was like, dang. So this might be the one. All right. So I want you to take a guess. What you think my favorite ice cream is?
Mint chocolate chip.
Nah, butter pecan.
Okay.
I don't know. I was thinking, and the same thing I asked is like, is butter pecan the underrated, like under the radar?
I do like butter. I just don't choose it. Mint chocolate chip is my favorite. So,
okay, because people no. I mean, I thought about it. Like, whenever I'm like, oh, chocolate vanilla, and I'm like, I want butter pecan. They're like, what? Like, that's not in the top tier. You know what I'm saying? Top tier choices. I think mint chocolate chip comes up there too. But if you say I want, plain chocolate vanilla and maybe strawberry, but no one just goes butter pecan, right? So that's my favorite though. I love it. Well, this has been great. I see you taking notes. I took notes too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Because I learned so much. I definitely want to check out your book. This is the part of the show that it's called Shout Outs and Plugs. This is an opportunity for you to show love to anyone you want to show love to. And then plugs, anything that you're working on or ways that the listeners can get engaged and connect with you. So the stage is set. My mouth is shut. Shout outs and plugs.
So my shout outs would be to my parents, who were very sincere with their support and encouragement, and shared with me that girls don't do that is not a part of our vocabulary. So that's a massive shout out. My team has been just incredible. So Jessica Tracy and Patricia Jordan, I just have a really great team of people who I work with who inspire me every day. My son, actually, big day for me today. I dropped him off at the airport, and he's starting his ROTC indoctrination program. I feel like I'm setting him off to Hunger Games, and I'm so sad. But I'm super proud. He just graduated high school, and we're really just super excited for him. Then a couple Marines who are my significant mentors. Boomer Milstead, I love you so much. He's been just a really meaningful force in my life.
Yeah, and excellent. Go ahead. Plugs.
And as far as plugs, Angie Connect. I've got a really big Polish last name now, and so we decided as a team to just go, like, if you'd love to stay connected, learn about my podcast, my feature risk takers on the Bet on You program, you can go to angieconnect.com and just find out what I'm up to. I also have a soft power series. I talk with women leaders on how to own their space, even if they're, quieted voiced, petite, don't really feel like they belong in a room. I help them realize they do, and I teach them how to use their voice.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We will stay engaged. You are now part of the Positive Filter alumni. I have a
Thank
Facebook
you.
group for I have a Facebook group for all my past guests, just to keep them connected and they can network with other people. But thank you so much for taking your time. Positive Filter listeners, if you like this episode, please share it with a family member or friend. As I said earlier, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. And so please continue to contribute to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all his work that he did for advocacy to combat food insecurity across the United States. And so please consider doing that. Share this podcast, give it a like, a subscribe, a review, anything to elevate it. Please listen to past episodes and please support all my guests. Thank you so much for listening, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.